Well, my name is Robert Linwood Altman. I'm known as Linwood Altman in this area. And before my service, but during the service years, I was Bob Altman for 3 years and 4 months. I was probably, when the war began, it was 1941, I think. And I was, in 1941, I was just graduating from high school. I was 16 years old, and it's not because I was so smart, it was because we only had 11 grades then. And that's principally what I was doing. And after graduating from high school, I was playing American Legion ball, and so I had a part-time job with Jimmy Burns in painting, and some of my worst experiences in my life. Trying to paint this ceiling of the Episcopal Church. But anyhow, after that, when I was 17, I started working at the mill, paper mill. After a short time with C.L. Ford's and Sons as a stockman. And that's principally what I was doing between high school and when I went in the service. I joined. I intended to join early at 17, but they wouldn't sign the paper, so I waited till I was 18 and I signed up right away. I went to Charleston and using the normal procedures. I took the short arm inspection and all that sort of stuff, and we got to the oral part of it. My teeth were in bad shape, so I had to come back, and Dr. McMeekin generously obliged me by staying open after hours and took care of my teeth, and I didn't go back in until October. And that's when I went in October, and I went on to Charleston and proceeded to Norfolk, Virginia. Well, I took boot camp in Norfolk, Virginia, and I took other training there, which was related somewhat to Harbor Entrance Control Post. And then from there, we went to Fort Story, Virginia, which was another harbor and outpost, and we took additional training there. This is signal, semaphore, and Morse code. And that was after we graduated. I took signal quartermaster school and graduated as a quartermaster. There were 2 in our outfit of 15 people that proceeded on, and we had 2 quartermasters. The rest of them were either signalmen or radiomen. And from there we went to Lido Beach and Long Island, and there we took combat training, and because they figured we would be in on the invasion from some degree, I guess. It was pretty rough. It was wintertime, and from there we went, we loaded up on Aquitania, which was a troop ship, a converted ship, French ship that was converted to a troop ship. We took the long route around, zigzagging, got up into Scotland on Christmas Eve. We went to, I think, Gourock, Scotland, and it was about midnight, and we had a good meal. We had hot dogs and sauerkraut. So we trained there. We on a signal tower out of Greenock, Scotland, along with they only had girls up there were doing that type of work, but they were good, efficient people, and that's where we trained mostly in the signal. We brought ships in, large ships coming in. And we stayed there for a while. I stayed in the Red Cross building. They gave us $5 a day subsistence. It cost us about $25 a day, 25 cents a day rather. And I saved all my money, sent it home, and ended up buying a couple of lots on Pawleys Island for $500 a piece. But we were trained there, and that was right before we went to headed down to France on this ship. Thomas Johnson was a converted ship, merchant ship, and we were stacked in about 5, 6 bunks high, and we sort of drifted down to offshore in France, and we waited till everything was clear because we were going round to Cherbourg from the land side. And that's where we ran into taking over the fort. And once we got to the fort, which is offshore, it's an artificial harbor is what it is. And then we had to go into tunnels underneath to see if there's any Germans left in there, which was right scary because tunnels were only about 4 feet wide and about 3 feet high. You pretty much had to crawl through them. And I being the leading highest rank in that particular group, other than our top man who was a first class radioman. I had to lead that group with a rifle going through. But we found no Germans. They were all gone. So then we set up the signal tower in the radio section. We were on top, the radio people were underneath, and underneath that we had the radar. We had some military from the Army operating that. And it was altogether, I guess there was 20 people on that fort altogether. And we stayed there, except for 4-day leave when we either had the choice of going to Paris or back to Scotland. About half of them went back to Scotland because they had gotten girlfriends there. And I went to Paris. On the way to Paris, I ran and met this fellow on the train whose grandfather was governor of Florida. And his uncle was in the French underground, a general in the French underground. So we visited them. We only had 4 days now. We visited them on the first night. And they insisted we meet these 2 girls and take them to a movie. So we did. As soon as they didn't speak English, we didn't speak French. They took off, went back home. So that was 2 nights wasted. Only had 2 nights left. So the next 2 nights we enjoyed. And then we drug ourselves back to Cherbourg. I don't know where the other fellow was going. I can't remember his name now. Nice fellow. But anyhow, it was quite an experience. And then that was on Christmas Eve of that same year is when Leopoldville sunk, torpedoed offshore, 5.5 miles offshore. And they brought these, and particularly the next day, this was at night, but the next day they were still picking them. It was cold, 5-foot waves. A lot of them died from the explosion. The others drowned. Some of them froze to death. Some of them got churned up in propellers from the boats out there trying to, PT boats and tugs that were trying to rescue them. So they rescued all except 802, and the rest of them got ashore. But it deviated there. This group of soldiers were headed for relief duty in the Battle of the Bulge. And because of the diminished number of people they had in that particular group, they were diverted over to Lorient, and they brought in somebody else to take their place. We stayed there. That was in the end of '44. And in March of '45, well, earlier than that, we turned it over to the French. And I had volunteered to stay there another month to train the French. And we did that to a certain degree, as much as you could stand. Worst smelling people ever saw. But they came to work from shore with flowers in their hand and perfume all over them. And anyhow, we put up with that for about a month, and then we went ashore. And I was assigned with this lieutenant to go to Jersey Isle on a patrol craft to accept the surrender of the Germans that had been isolated there for most of the war, particularly after the invasion. And we got that done. We stayed there overnight and came on back, and then we proceeded to go back to England, through England, and left on the Queen Elizabeth and came back to the States. And this girl I met in New York right before I left, she was an attractive girl. She had red hair. She worked for Chase Manhattan. And I grew up in those months that I was with her, but I was a country boy. We danced at the Penn Hotel. We went to see Dizzy Gillespie and other name bands, and I had my first mixed drink there, a gin buck, which was gin and 7-Up, I believe. Anyhow, when I came back, she was waiting on me, and I brought her back to Pawleys Island, or Georgetown, Pawleys Island. And I was reassigned to a ship, you might call it. It was more of a boat. It was only 112 feet long. I went to Chicago. And while waiting for this boat to be commissioned, I was on guard duty in Chicago on one of those wharfs down there. Nearly froze to death. I needed 2 peacoats instead of 1. But anyhow, I was assigned this ship, and I had to help bring it down the Mississippi River all the way to New Orleans. And that's when I took up my quartermaster duties, which I knew very little about at that time. And so we ran aground a couple of times, shifting mud in that Mississippi River, but we got off. We went in dry dock in the New Orleans, and my duty was correct maps, charts from there, in the path, route we were taking all the way around through the Panama Canal up the west coast and we were on the way to Hawaii. My duties were correcting the charts and picking up the mail every day. I had a great time. And finally we left there and we went to Tampa. And there we went to Key West, and from there we were headed to Jamaica. And the only bad experience I had there, I was the 3rd officer. I wasn't an officer, but they only had three of us assigned the duties of getting that ship where it was going. And I had to take the ship in and out. But we only had a crew of about 14 people, I believe. And we got caught in a trough, which you're not supposed to do, because it might have been a little tropical storm. And that threw me out of the seat all the way out of the pilot house, and I caught on the railing, and I pulled myself back in. We got out of the trough, and the rest of the trip was pretty good. And we got to Jamaica, went into Kingston, Jamaica, and that was my first trip to Jamaica. And we've been going back to Jamaica every year since, I think it was in the 60s, every other year. Every other way we go to, in the last 3 years I've gone every year. Because I really loved the place. And we left there and went to Panama Canal Zone, and we had liberty on both ends. I had pictures of them I sent to my grandkids of my standing on the deck with shorts on and a monkey on my shoulder. So they all enjoyed that. But it was a nice trip up the coast. We stopped at Nicaragua and Guatemala and then went to L.A. When I got to L.A., I had enough points to get out. So I got out and came back by train through Texas, which was one heck of a trip. But then I got back to Charleston and the war was over. Everybody was celebrating VJ Day. All my friends were already back, and I knew they were at Pavilion at Pawleys Island. So I tried to get back and had to detour around because of the bridge accident. And finally got to Pawleys Island and went in the pavilion over there, and it was a wreck. They had celebrated the night before and tore everything up. And I finally hooked up with them the next day. But that was about the extent of it. You got a certain number of points for the length of time and where you were and where you were in a battle area and so forth. And I don't know exactly how it was, but being aboard ship, you got a certain number of points and the length of your stay, I guess. But I really don't know. I can remember I had 34 points. It was enough to get out. And so I was ready to get out. People couldn't understand why I turned down a trip to Hawaii. But it was a yard freight. It was designed, what it was, these big ships can't go up and dock usually in most places. And you have to take supplies out to them, particular food supplies. We were on a refrigerated type ship. And that's what it was. It sounded like pretty boring duty to me, so I was ready to get out. That was on Christmas Eve when we had that, the Leopoldville sunk. My father had sent a bottle, and I can't remember whether it was ketchup or whether it was Heinz 57 or what it was, but it was a bottle full of bourbon. And so after I got off duty that night, I went up and drank the whole thing. I didn't share it with anybody because it was pretty devastating. And I started off early, and I had to pull 2 duties that night because of the intensity of what was going on. So I'd been up there for 12 hours. But that was a welcome relief to get off that bridge and have a good drink. You didn't have anything to drink on that fort. There was nothing out there. They didn't serve 3.2 beer or anything else. You were stuck there, and that's where we stayed. The only hand grenade we lobbed was over that fort. The fort we were on had a room that was full of hand grenades, and they were potato masher type with a handle on it. And they used to practice. One fellow used to practice throwing hand grenades at a dead German that washed up and things like that. We had to stop that, but that was the only time other time we had used any firearms. We had a plane that flew over every night at the same time, and everybody got out there with a rifle. And there's one fellow, Joe Seifert. He shot, instead of shooting a rifle, he shot one of these, what do you call it? Anyhow, it was a flare that went up pretty high, and it landed on him. So he ended up in the hospital, so he burned. And he was one of the ones I'd been in contact with down in Tampa, Florida. After the war, I say once, you know, you sort of forget about these people once you get out of service, even though you remember them. And that's when I tried to contact them after I settled down a few years back, and tried to contact them. And this one fella, and I wrote to him in Monaco, in Pennsylvania, I guess, or New York, Pennsylvania, I guess. It was near Pittsburgh. And he was all excited. He called me right away. I put my phone on him. He was staying in the same place, and he knew another fella in Cleveland that was staying in the same place. And I contacted this fella down in Tampa, Florida. He'd married a girl in Scotland, Jeannie, a cute little girl. But the first thing he told me, he says, "My wife divorced me. We've been married 50 years and she divorced me." So she was living down the block from him. And I couldn't get in touch with him at one time, so through the internet, I located her. And she had a voice box. She apparently had cancer. And she couldn't talk too plain, but I asked her what's the matter with Joe. I couldn't get any response. We didn't answer his phone. She said, "Nothing wrong with Joe, he just can't hear." So I wrote him, and he lived till I think of last year. And he died, and the other one died last year. And the other one is still living, I think, because I called him yesterday. After this brought to mind, I said, "Well, you know, I better check on him," and called up and said his phone has been discontinued. So I don't know where he is. I was a big fan of John Wayne, and he always turned me on red, white, and blue. So I really was ready to go at 17, and I couldn't wait to get in. I was brought up. We were a poor family. I lived on Harmarket Street, extension of what then called Whitesbridge Road. And even though I was making more money than I ever thought I would at 52 cents an hour at the mill and getting overtime, I really wanted to get in the service because all my friends had gone. Everybody from school that I graduated with had already gone. And that was my inspiration to really want to go early, but I couldn't go till 18. And when I signed up for the Navy, and that's where they sent me. I always had, even from high school days, I wanted to go to college. And I knew that I would never go to college if I stayed here in Georgetown. I would be like the rest of my family, my uncles. I'd probably end up working at International Paper Company because I was there already. And so I saw that was one way of getting into college. I was aware of the benefits. And that's one reason why me and my redhead girlfriend parted, because I wanted to go to college and she wanted to get married. So we said goodbye at the airport over in Charleston. I never saw her again. I did call her when I graduated. I went up with two friends, Charlie Cheesem and Barnes Ball. This was after I graduated, and we went up to New York, just the three of us, just to have a good time. And I said, well, I'll just call her. So I did call her, and this was 3.5 years later. And I asked if I could see her. She said, no, I'm getting married in 2 weeks. I said, thank you, goodbye. So but that was always my intent. In my class, there was only one person that I know of that went to college, from far as the men's concerned. None of them were financially able to go, and I certainly wasn't, and my family wasn't. So, but I did go and graduate. Well, it made it possible for all of us. We were, this whole group of friends of mine, and you probably have had some of them in here, Jack Blunt, Al Schuler, some of the survivors that I know, and Al Schuler's on the other tenement joining us, but Blukey Schuler's brother and Bootsy Schuler, these were all families that I knew, grew up with. Jack Blunt was my roommate, and Marion Harrison was my roommate. And I studied retail and economics. And that's what I wanted to get into, and eventually that's what I did get into. And I graduated, because they had all started, I got out later than they did. They started a semester ahead of me. I had to go to summer school to catch up with them, so we all graduated together, except for Jack Blunt. He didn't stay up. He wanted to come home and get married. Yeah, I went to the university and graduated from the University of South Carolina in 1950. And from there, I've had several jobs after I graduated, and ended up working for Esso Standard Oil Company in Georgetown in the acetane portion. Then I went to Charleston in the petroleum end of it, and then I ended up in Beaufort in the acetane portion. But this was in the retail business. We also sold stoves and all kind of gas-operated equipment. But I wanted to get back in retail and full time, and that's when I bought. Doc Lashcott was a friend of mine, so he had the store on the corner, north entrance to Pawleys Island, and I wanted to get in retail, and so I bought it from him in January and nearly starved to death. Didn't have enough groceries in the store to eat myself. But we got through it. A fellow named Bill Orlant in Charleston, they had he went to the Citadel, but he was a friend of mine. He was a boxer and a football player, and I used to tease him all the time. We used to go from Columbia down to watch the boxing matches. And I got to know him, and he came by. And if he hadn't come by, I don't know what had happened to me, because I didn't have any money. I sold my car, my house down in Beaufort to be able to buy the store. But he came by and he said, "I'll stock this thing from the bottom to the top." And he did, and I didn't sign any papers. I just paid him off in a couple, 2 or 3 years, I think it was. But he was a Gunnar Orlant. A great fellow. He's died now. I was interested in boxing, and Ray Evant from Georgetown was on the boxing team from the University of South Carolina, and we used to watch him box because he was a great boxer. And so we'd go down to Charleston to watch these boxing matches. After the boxing matches, everybody went to Perditas. No, not Perditas. No, it was a spaghetti place, and everybody went there after the boxing matches. I got to know him. I just kept teasing him and telling him I could whip him and all that sort of thing. So I got his goat. But we became friends, and when he'd come to Columbia to box, I'd always make a point of seeing him up there, and we just got to be good friends. And then afterwards, just continued on for years and years after that, because it was a long time before I finally came back to Pawleys. But he really helped me out. I looked forward to it because I was really anxious to get over there and get into it because everything was so boring up to that time, and it really physically difficult because of the training in Scotland. We used to have to run up and down those hills all the time. And those I ended up with blisters all over my feet, and the weather was horrible there when I was there. It rained all the time. I don't believe I ever saw sunshine. But they treated us nice. We stayed in the Red Cross, and they had a little dance floor there, and they had music, and I played Sentimental Journey over and over. Never homesick. I was glad to get away. I really was. I never looked back. If it hadn't have been for the war, of course, I would not have had the opportunity to go to college, I don't think. Not as quickly as I did. And the experience of traveling, it was after I got back and got on this small boat, this yard freighter, it was nothing but a pleasure tour. I mean, to go to all these countries and end up in Los Angeles, where we had a great time too. So I enjoyed that tremendously, that part of it, and it was a lot of boredom on the what we call the Rock. It was the Fort Delos off Cherbourg, but it was the same people, same. Nothing much happened other than that one torpedoed ship out there. But we had occasion where there were mines in the harbor, and the people that were supposed to come over and set the mines off, which was all the equipment was in Fort Delos. So we were up on the bridge trying to. This boat came across the channel there, and we were supposed to blow it up. I think it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and this boat was right over that spot at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And we were desperate up there with lights and semaphore and everything we could gather, trying to stop those people. And it happened to be the people who were going to set it off. So we found out later. I had one occasion that I have to go to shore when I was training the French, which I didn't get along with. This French officer was trying to use the big, this was a time not too long after the torpedoing the ship out there, and we were instructed not to use that big light, signal light, because you could see it 12.5 miles away. And this French officer was trying to use it, and I stopped him. He didn't speak English, I didn't speak French, so between the two of us, we had a little powwow. He reported me to the captain on shore, and they put me on a boat and hauled me over to talk to the captain. I thought I was going to get put in the brig or something, but I told him what happened. He congratulated me, and I left. But that was about as much excitement we had over there. They did have one time, they brought some wax, I guess that's what they call them, to entertain us, I guess. And they all looked like my aunts. So I went up to my room, went to bed. So other than that, there was not a lot happening on the Rock. The weather got pretty bad where the waves actually splashed over the Rock, or the fort. The fort was extended all the way across the front of Cherbourg, and this part hadn't been damaged, but the other end of it was another fort. It had been, the planes had really wrecked that part, so it was not usable. But it was about a mile away, I guess, from one end to the other.